Welcome everyone to the self quiz unit 2. So in this video, I'm going to be reviewing basically the self quiz with all of you. So this is one of the work that was done by one of your peers, and I see that in this some of you probably having a bit of difficulty because I haven't really seen a lot of people having full score in the self quiz after many attempts. So I think it's a good opportunity to go over the questions to make sure that everybody understand. Again, these are very good questions. It can also those questions can be very helpful in your assignment unit 2. It can also be helpful to reinforce the concepts of this chapter. So it's very important to make sure that you really understand this, as again this could be things that will come back in the final exam as well as in your graded quiz. So that's why I take the time to make sure we go over that one by one. Okay, so here we are given a series of questions. So in this first set of questions, we have the frequency of hurricane hits. So here we have the category. So here we said the next two questions refer to, okay, so the hurricane that had a direct hit on the US between 1951 and 2004. So the hurricane are given a strength category rating based on the minimum of wind speed generated by the storm. So category 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the direct hit 72, the relative frequency and the cumulative frequency. So you see here, one thing that's important to note is that the cumulative frequency, because it keep adding up until 1. So you see the last one here is 1. It means that we have added all the frequencies of the relative. So the relative frequency, the only thing to note about the relative frequency is that when we talk about relative frequency, it gives you the proportion of each, let's say, category. So let's say category 1 that has a proportion of 39.93% and so on. And the sum of the relative frequency should always give you 1. So that's why you have the cumulative, and the cumulative, the last row will always be 1 because the sum of all the relative frequency is 1. Because when you get to the cumulative, what happens is that you are adding all the relative frequencies. So let's say here is just the first frequency, relative frequency, but this value will be this frequency plus this frequency. So these two, sum of the two, and so on. So this is a very important concept. So that in this should help us already answer some of the questions. So here we ask, what is the relative frequency of direct hits that were category 2 hurricanes? So here we see that it was not in the table, that value. That value was not in the table. So how do we get that? One way to get that is to remember the fact what I just mentioned. The sum of all the relative frequency should be equal to 1. So it's all about solving the equation to solve for P, which is what you do here. And you basically have this answer. So it's only going to be P1 minus all the frequency that was given in the table. So yes, that's the answer for this question. So now the second question is the relative frequency of um, direct hits that were at least a category 3 storm. So again, when we say at least, it means that you are either going 3 or more in categories. So it could be 3 or 4. So what is that? So we know the relative frequency for category 3, we know the relative frequency for category 4, and we know the relative frequency for category 5. So it's all a matter of adding those 3, and it will give you the answer that you're looking for, which is the relative frequency for 3 or more. So again, relative frequency is also important because it kind of give you a bit of a glimpse of probabilities, because remember those are proportions which can serve as probabilities. Again, it's not really relevant in this class, but the probability is usually defined based on frequencies as well. So in the second set of questions, we have 60 adults with gum disease were asked the number of time per week they use to floss before the diagnosis. So again, we have a table of incomplete result. So again, you have the gist of it. So everything should already be straightforward here. So you have the number per week, you have the frequency. So again, remember, like we are saying that the number of time per week they use to floss before the diagnosis. So this is the number of time per week. So if they floss 0 time per week before the diagnosis, there's about 27 out of the 60 adults, which is approximately 45% or 0.45. So and so on. So we don't have these values. Then we have the cumulative for 3. So what this is saying is that if you are summing the frequency, the relative frequency of all of 0, 1, and 3, we end up having this. So that's pretty much what we have. So let's see what the question is asking. So what is the relative frequency that flossed 6 times per week? So 6 times per week is, we have 3, which is the frequency that the adults floss 3 times per week before the diagnosis. And we know that there were 60 adults. So if you want the relative frequency, you only have to divide the occurrence, which is the frequency, by the total number available, which is 60. So that's why you have this 3 divided by 60 that give you this answer. So again, relative frequencies. Now, the relative frequency that floss at least once a week. So you see that in this case, we don't have a lot of the values, because here we ask that floss at least once per week. So that means it must be either 1, 2, it must not be 0. So for example, we know that no floss per week there were 27 of them. But when we start saying at least 1 floss per week, we are saying that there were 18 that floss 1. 3, we don't have the value. 6 times we have 3 adults. And 7 times we have only 1 that floss 7 times. So we want to know the relative frequency that you floss at least once per week. So because we don't know these values, the best way to find that, it means that we only need to, because we know the sum of all of this is 1, and we know that 45% of all of this, or 0.45, because remember, it's almost like a probability. So 0.45 does not floss before the diagnosis. So we just need to do 1, which is the sum of all the frequency, minus this. And that will give you, because remember, if you do 1, because we know the sum of all of this column, if we knew these values, it will be 1. So to get the sum of everything that remains when we floss at least once, we just need to do 1 minus 0.45. That's why you see the answer here is 1 minus 0.45, which is 0.55. Again, 0.55 would have been the sum of all the relative frequencies of the number of times that the adult floss at least once. So not 0, but at least once before the diagnosis. So that's the idea here. So now let's look at the next question. So in this question, we are given the number of malfunctioning products per production series that was recorded for several production series. So we have a data set that was given to us here. So remember the CUM sum, again, we have the frequency table here. So this is a frequency table. We don't have this. This is just a something that was mock-up that was done. But then we have the cum sum of that frequency table. So basically, this is the cumulative frequency. We keep adding numbers until we get to this. So again, this is a cum sum. It's not the. So they didn't divide this by the total. So technically, there should be about 72 items in this data set. So we'll come back to the next video.